Hi, I'm Jackie Wobble, and these are my final thoughts for ECS 110. Be in the world, but not of the world. This is a phrase that I've learned and that was instilled into my life, coming from a Christian home where my dad was a pastor. This term stays with me all the time, and I find it very hard to do, especially when you're trying to apply biblical principles to worldly principles. I like to keep my faith simple. I struggle with the fact that there's so many different interpretations of the Bible and the Scripture, and I find that man's theory and man's interpretation becomes very complicated, and it loses some of its core meanings when they're trying to make it fit for what they're trying to get across, the message they're trying to get across. And so I just go with keep it simple. And I hang on the two values to love your neighbor as yourself and to love the Lord your God with all your heart, and everything else falls into place. And so going with that, that's meaning when you're loving your neighbor, that's anybody that's around you and you accept them for who they are and where they're at, which is why I love this course. In this course, during ECS 110, I began my course with having to do an article summary on 2 Acres and a Cow by Carter. This really opened my eyes. I never knew about a lot of this information. It disturbed me how people could treat other people with such disrespect and create them to be in an oppressive state and controlling where they live, how much food they can have, how much land they could have, what they could do with that land. And that just really disturbs me that our society still can be that way, is that way, and that they were. And my heart goes out for First Nations people. I love them. I live very close to a few reserves, and I work with First Nations children. And yeah, it just very saddens me, and I'm very glad that I learned about this part of their history. Also, when I watched Muffins for Granny, it really opened my eyes to a whole new world that I didn't even know existed. When we went into a reading about white privilege and male privilege and unpacking the invisible knapsack, I never thought of myself having white privilege ever before. Um, I've never taken another look at another race and thought of how it would be like to grow up and live the way they did. I I tend to be a person that loves people for who they are, no matter what, and so I find it hard that if I'm thinking that I have white privilege, how that makes me unequal, and I like to view myself as equal with other people. And so this was a very hard reading to come across. It really gave me a new perspective of my own life that I didn't realize and I was unaware about. And it was it was a great eye opener also. So some of the hardest realities that I had during this course would have been to do with gender diversity, sexual orientation, somewhat to do with some of the Christian beliefs that I grew up believing. Um, now that I'm older and I've grown into my own thoughts and my own views, and um, my walk has been transformed in my own way, in my own path. I don't tend to believe with some of the biblical principles, or sometimes people tend to say that, homosexuality is a sin, and I don't view it that way anymore. I have friends now that are homosexual, lead homosexual lives. I also had a friend that was a hermaphrodite who grew up as a man and at the age of 46 had to transform to a woman due to medical conditions um, and concerns. And so that's not by choice. That's humanity. That's medical, and I don't think we realize that all the time. Also, my family, we sometimes vary in beliefs on this matter, and so it can create tension. And so I tend to be the one that would sit back and not give my opinion, because I don't like. Sometimes there's no winning. There's no argument to be won, so there's no point, I feel. Um, Also, I feel like I have no problem with homosexuality and no prejudice against it. But when I think about if it's in my classroom and if I'm wanting to address and reach out to each child in my classroom, there's going to be, is there going to be a fear there? What if I introduce some literature that has a character that's homosexual that's in the curriculum? And I'm going to have to know how to deal with uh, parents that are in agreement with that and parents that are against that. White privilege was very hard for me because I feel like it's out of my control. I was born white, and sometimes I feel like, is it fair that we're being so hard on for the fact that we just have privilege and it's just kind of in our pocket? I had mixed feelings about some of the readings where I would be like in agreement, but then I'd be like, oh, you don't got to be so hard on me. Residential schools, I was completely unaware um, of residential schools. I've never learned about it in school. I don't remember reading about it in the media or hearing about it in the news. And so this really um, just knocked down a wall in my life that I didn't even realize was there, and it's really helped me because I work with First Nations children, and so now I have an understanding of some of their attitudes and barriers that are up, whereas before I just figured it was a stereotypical thing that was the way First Nations were, and just had to learn to work with it. Some of the emotions that I had during this course were very mixed. Sometimes I felt that I would feel angry. I had sadness. I felt misled by my society. I felt hopeful that I can help bring change in the classroom and I can help motivate people to see another side of things, and fearful because whether or not I have the courage to do the teach and bring this forward to other people. So after ECS 110 course, I I'm very strong feelings that dominance and inequalities will always surround us. It's kind of like survival of the fittest. There will always be somebody that wants to be in control or want to have power, and there will always have people that are arguing or disagreeing with things, and so we'll always have this inequality and dominance and minority state happening. I don't think it's something that we can escape. In viewing Michael Capello's final thoughts about individualism and systemic learning, I'm in total agreement. It's easier to teach someone one-on-one and get them to understand something than to have to incorporate it into like an education system or a church system or a, a small group system. It's a much more easier to teach and train people individually than systemically. I know that I now have to retrain my thinking from what I grew up to believe, and now I have to, it's a new thinking process, and um, having to look at things in different lights and in different ways all the time. And I'm gonna have to face the fear of maybe people won't like me, but that's okay. If I stay strong in what I know is truth and fact, then that's okay. And I might come up against people who are in disagreement with me, and that's all right. because it is a responsibility for me as a teacher to make sure that that comes across. Came up with a quote: "To change the world takes time, to change yourself takes courage." So I end and I conclude by saying that I know that I can hold on to my core beliefs and change my thinking and my view. And I found this great little quote picture. "We could learn a lot from crayons. Some are sharp, some are pretty, some are dull, some have weird names, and all are different colors, but they all exist very nicely in the same box." And that's how I feel like society is. We all have to learn to exist nicely together. Thank you so much for this course. It's opened my eyes and given me a new perspective.